If you were a German soldier captured in 1944, you expected hell. You expected interrogation rooms. You expected fists. You expected hunger, cold floors, humiliation. You expected to be broken. So when the transport truck stopped in the middle of the Nevada desert, miles away from civilization, every man inside them believed this was the end. Not death. Worse. The sun was setting behind the mountains. Sand rolled across the road in thin orange waves. There was nothing for miles except silence and military fencing. Far in the distance, the faint glow of lights shimmered, closer to the desert than to any city. One of the soldiers whispered, "Is this near Las Vegas?" Another spat dry blood from his lip. "No, this is nowhere." The trucks rolled past warning signs, past barbed wire, past armed guards. The men had been captured in North Africa, some in Italy. A few had survived Normandy. They were officers, engineers, radio specialists, not random infantry. They knew too much, which is why they were terrified. The convoy finally stopped in front of a steel gate. The sign above it read, "Eden Facility, authorized personnel only." The irony was almost insulting. The gate slowly opened, and that was the first strange thing. It didn't creak. It didn't clang. It didn't feel like a prison. It slid open smoothly, like the entrance to a hotel. They expected chains. Instead, they were given towels. The soldiers were marched off the trucks. No one shouted. No one struck them. No one even insulted them. American officers, calm, clean uniforms, polite expressions, simply guided them forward. One officer spoke German fluently. "Gentlemen," he said, "you will be treated with dignity here. You are prisoners of war, not criminals." The men didn't believe him. Not yet. They were taken inside a large concrete structure partially buried in the desert floor. The air changed instantly. Cool, filtered, almost sterile. Inside there were no cages, no dark cells. Instead, there were hallways with polished floors, electric lighting that didn't flicker. Doors, real doors, wooden, numbered. Each soldier was handed a small package, clean clothing, shaving kit, soap, a folded towel, a toothbrush. One man began laughing, not because it was funny, because it didn't make sense. This had to be psychological warfare. "They want us relaxed," he muttered. Then they start asking questions. But no one asked anything. Not that night. The rooms. When they were shown their sleeping quarters, the silence became uncomfortable. Each room had a real bed with a mattress, fresh sheets, a desk, a chair, a small bookshelf, a lamp, a private bathroom with running water. One of the younger soldiers stared at the sink. He turned the handle. Clean water flowed. He looked at the American guard standing in the hallway. "Is this temporary?" The guard shrugged. "This is your room." The soldier hesitated. "Where are the bars?" The guard didn't answer. He just walked away. And here's the part that no one noticed at first. There were no locks on the inside. Or the outside. Dinner that evening, they were escorted to a dining hall. They expected rations, thin soup, hard bread, maybe beans. Instead, they were served roast chicken potatoes with butter, fresh bread, coffee, apple pie, real apple pie. For several minutes, none of them touched their plates. One officer stood up slowly. "This is a trick." But hunger defeated pride. They ate. And it was good. Too good. The first night, back in their rooms, the fear returned. Because kindness can be more terrifying than cruelty. Cruelty is simple. You know what it means. You know how to survive it. But this? This felt like preparation. Several soldiers stayed awake, waiting for midnight interrogations. None came, no footsteps, no screams, no doors slamming, only silence. Perfect, controlled silence. One man couldn't sleep. He stepped into the hallway, empty. He walked further. No guard stopped him. At the end of the corridor was a stairwell leading upward. He climbed it, slowly. His heart pounded. This had to be forbidden. He reached a steel door. It wasn't locked. He pushed. The desert night air hit his face. He stepped outside. There were watchtowers in the distance. There were fences. But no one shouted. No spotlight snapped on. He took 3 more steps forward into the sand. Nothing happened. He could see the road in the distance, the same road they arrived on. It stretched endlessly toward darkness. He stood there for nearly a minute. Then something unexpected happened. He turned around and walked back inside. Not because he was forced, but because he didn't know where else to go. The door closed quietly behind him. Chapter the second, Strange Thing. The next morning, there was no roll call, no head count, no barking orders. Breakfast was already waiting. When the soldiers gathered in the dining hall, something else felt wrong. Everyone was there. No one had tried to escape. Not a single man. One of them finally asked the American officer, "What is this place?" The officer smiled politely. "A research facility." "What are you researching?" The officer paused, then said something that would haunt them for weeks. "We're studying what happens when enemies are treated like guests." Silence fell over the room. One soldier laughed nervously. "You expect us to believe that?" The officer didn't respond. He simply added, "The gates are not locked," and walked away. The beginning of doubt. Over the next days, no interrogations came. Instead, books were provided, in German, newspapers, carefully selected, access to music, chess sets, even writing materials to send letters home, though they never received replies. It was paradise compared to what they had imagined. And that was the problem. Because if this was paradise, why did it feel like a trap? At night, some of them began to whisper, "What if the war is already lost? What if they don't need information? What if we're not here to be punished?" But the most disturbing question came from the youngest officer in the group. "What if we're not prisoners at all?" No one answered him. Because deep down, they were beginning to realize something impossible. The doors were open. The gates were unlocked. And yet, no one wanted to leave. On the 4th day, they finally heard it. Not shouted, not announced. Simply written on a folder left deliberately on one of the tables in the recreation hall. Stamped in black ink. Project Eden. Behavioral Retention Study. No one admitted to taking the folder. But by evening, every man had seen it. Why them? That afternoon, the American officer who spoke German, Captain Harris, gathered them in a small lecture room. There were no chains on the chairs, no guards in the corners, just a chalkboard and a calm, almost academic atmosphere. "Gentlemen," Harris began, "you were not selected randomly." The room stiffened. "You are engineers, officers, communications specialists, artillery coordinators. You are educated, structured, disciplined." A tall lieutenant interrupted. "You need intelligence." Harris shook his head. "If we wanted intelligence, you would already have given it. Or we would have taken it." No one liked how casually he said that. "So, what do you want?" someone asked. Harris wrote 2 words on the chalkboard: loyalty, threshold, silence. "We want to know," he continued, "how long loyalty to a defeated ideology survives when pressure is removed." A chill ran through the room. "You think we are defeated?" one officer snapped. Harris didn't answer. Instead, he asked something else. "If the gates are open, and you are well fed, and treated with dignity, what exactly are you loyal to?" The first change. At first, they mocked the idea. They were soldiers of the Reich. Captured? Yes. Defeated? Perhaps temporarily. Broken? Never. But something subtle began to shift. It started with small things. One of the men stopped wearing his uniform jacket to dinner. Another shaved his mustache. Someone quietly began reading American newspapers, even though they claimed not to care. No one discussed ideology anymore. Instead, they discussed comfort. The beds, the food, the strange silence of the desert nights. And then came the first real fracture. The argument. It happened in the library. Carl Weiss, a former radio operator, had been reading a book about American constitutional law. Another prisoner saw him. "You enjoy that?" the man asked coldly. "It's interesting," Carl replied carefully. "Interesting or persuasive?" Carl closed the book slowly. "What if the war is already over?" The room went still. "You're talking like a traitor." "No," Carl said. "I'm talking like someone who sees reality." The argument escalated quickly. Voices raised, accusations thrown, and for the first time since arriving, there was shouting. But no guards intervened. No punishment followed. That night, something changed. Not in the camp. In them. The gate test. On the 7th day, Captain Harris made an announcement. "Tomorrow morning," he said calmly, "the outer gate will remain fully open for 1 hour. There will be no guards posted, no watchtowers manned." Murmurs exploded across the room. "You're lying! You'll shoot us!" "You think we're stupid?" Harris simply replied, "You are free to test it." Morning in the desert. The next morning, the sun rose brutally bright over the Nevada sand. The outer steel gate stood wide open. No soldiers nearby, no trucks, no visible surveillance. Beyond it, nothing but endless desert and the faint line of highway miles away. The men gathered near the entrance. No one crossed the threshold. "This is psychological manipulation," someone whispered. "They want us to prove something." "Yes," Carl said quietly. "They want to see if we choose captivity." The word hung in the air. Choose. One brave soul stepped forward, a sergeant from Tunisia. He walked past the gate. 5 steps. 10. 20. The sand shifted under his boots. He looked back. No alarms. No gunfire. Nothing. He kept walking. 30 steps. 50. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, heat already rising. He stopped. He could keep going. But then what? No food, no water, no map, no idea where he truly was. He stood there for almost a full minute. And then, slowly, he walked back. The gate remained open for the full hour. Not a single man left. When it finally closed, no announcement was made. But something had shifted permanently. They now knew the truth. They were not physically imprisoned. They were psychologically anchored. The realization. That evening, Carl said something that made everyone uncomfortable. They're not studying loyalty to Germany. He looked around the dining hall. They're studying dependency. And suddenly, the luxury made sense. The food, the beds, the respect. If cruelty creates resistance, comfort creates attachment. One officer slammed his fist on the table. "We are not weak." "No," Carl replied calmly, "but we are human." The second unbelievable detail. That night, one of the prisoners found something strange. On his desk, placed neatly beside his lamp, was a small envelope. Inside, a photograph of his wife and child. Recent. Taken months after he was captured. On the back was written in German, "They are safe." No signature. No explanation. When he rushed into the hallway, others were emerging from their rooms, each holding an envelope, each holding proof that their families were alive. No interrogation, no threats, just reassurance. And that was the moment fear truly began. Because now the question was no longer, what are they taking from us? It became, what are they giving us, and why? On day 12, the Americans stopped pretending this was temporary. No more orientation talks, no more subtle hints, no more explanations. Instead, a single typed notice appeared in the dining hall. Internal governance is now your responsibility. Meals and supplies will continue as scheduled. No external directives will be issued. That was it. No signature, no rank, just a statement. They stared at it for a long time. "You see," one officer muttered, "they want chaos." But chaos never came. Something stranger did. The first meeting that evening, the prisoners gathered in the recreation hall voluntarily. No one ordered it. No one scheduled it. It simply happened. Karl Weiss stood near the front, not as a leader, just as someone willing to speak. "We cannot drift like this," he said. "If this continues, we need structure." A former artillery captain scoffed. "Structure? We had structure." Karl looked at him calmly. "And where did it lead us?" The room tightened. That sentence would have been dangerous 2 weeks ago. Now it was just uncomfortable. Someone proposed electing representatives. The word felt foreign. Another suggested reinstating military rank hierarchy. That proposal was louder, familiar, safer. The debate lasted 3 hours. No guards entered. No one interrupted. It was the first real freedom they had experienced, and they didn't know how to handle it. Finally, a compromise emerged. They would vote. The ballots. The next morning, paper slips were placed on each dining table. No American distributed them. They were simply there. The question was printed in German. How shall this community be governed? Option A, military hierarchy. Option B, elected council. Option C. No formal leadership. The room buzzed with tension. "This is manipulation," someone whispered. "Of course it is," Karl replied. "But it's still our choice." They voted in silence, folded the slips, placed them in a wooden box. No ceremony, no flags, just paper and uncertainty. When the votes were counted, the result stunned half the room. Option B, elected council, won by a clear majority. Several officers stood immediately. "You're abandoning discipline." "No," Karl answered quietly. "We're choosing survival." The words echoed. Survival. Not victory. Not ideology. Survival. The fracture. That afternoon, something subtle cracked. The men who had voted for military hierarchy began sitting together at meals. They spoke in lower voices, watched others carefully. Meanwhile, the majority began discussing plans. Rotating kitchen oversight, shared reading groups, maintenance schedules, discussion forums. They were building a society, inside a prison, with no locks. One of the hardliners finally confronted Carl in the hallway. "You're playing their game." Carl didn't deny it. "Yes," he said, "because their game doesn't involve starving." The officer's jaw tightened. "You've changed." Carl's answer came without hesitation. "So have you. You're just fighting it." The Americans stay silent. Days passed. No intervention, no correction. But subtle observations began to surface. The food portions adjusted slightly, based on communal decisions. Requested books appeared the next week. Even musical instruments were delivered after someone suggested forming a quartet. It felt collaborative, which made it more terrifying. One evening, Carl noticed something in the ceiling corner of the meeting room. A small, dark lens. Not hidden, just present. They weren't being punished. They were being recorded. The real experiment revealed. On day 15, Captain Harris returned. He entered during dinner, calm as ever. "I see progress," he said. No one responded. "You've established governance, conflict resolution, resource distribution." He paused, studying their faces. "Do you know what makes this remarkable?" Silence. Harris continued. "We have run parallel facilities." The room froze. In some, prisoners were treated harshly. In others, moderately. In one, like this. He let that sink in. In every harsh facility, resistance increased. Identity hardened. Loyalty intensified. A long pause. In this one, ideological rigidity has decreased by 38%. The numbers hit harder than any insult. "You're measuring us?" someone whispered. "Yes," Harris replied plainly. "What happens when the study ends?" another asked. Harris looked around the room. "That depends on you." And then he said something that changed everything. "You are no longer being evaluated on what you believe." He stepped closer to the table. "You are being evaluated on what you build." The second vote. That night, a new proposal emerged. Unplanned. Unexpected. One of the younger soldiers stood up. "If we are building something," he said slowly, "then maybe we should decide something else." He swallowed. "Should we remain prisoners of war or request civilian status?" The air vanished from the room. Civilian status meant something unthinkable. It meant recognizing the war might be lost. It meant stepping outside the identity of soldier. It meant surrender in a deeper sense. The debate that followed was not loud. It was heavy. Some argued that accepting civilian status would dishonor comrades still fighting. Others said clinging to a lost war was meaningless. Carl said nothing. He simply listened. Finally, someone asked the question that had been growing in everyone's mind. "If the gates are open, are we prisoners at all?" No one answered. The night before the vote. Sleep didn't come easily. Some men paced their rooms. Others stared at photographs of their families. One officer quietly folded his uniform and placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk. Not discarded, but not worn. The desert outside was silent. Inside, something irreversible was happening. Not forced, not demanded, chosen. The result. The vote was held at breakfast. No Americans present. When the slips were counted, the result was closer this time, but clear. A majority voted to request civilian classification. The room felt divided, but also lighter. Carl finally spoke. "We are not betraying who we were," he said softly. "We are deciding who we will be." The twist no one saw coming. That afternoon, Captain Harris returned with documents, official forms, but before handing them out, he said something unexpected. "There is one condition." The room tensed. "If you request civilian status, you will no longer be classified as prisoners." A murmur spread. "You will no longer be under guard." More murmurs. "And you will be free to leave the facility at any time." Silence. "But," Harris added calmly, "all privileges inside will end. No prepared meals, no supplied books, no guaranteed shelter. The experiment would be over. They would be free." The weight of the choice crushed the room, because now freedom had a cost: comfort, security, community. They had to choose between a controlled paradise or uncertain reality. His name was Otto Reinhardt, 34 years old, former logistics officer, practical, quiet, not ideological, not rebellious, which is why no one expected him to be the one. When Captain Harris finished explaining the condition, freedom without support, the room had fallen into a suffocating silence. No meals, no shelter guarantees, no protection. Total release. The choice was now brutally simple: stay in comfort under observation, or walk into the Nevada desert alone. That evening, Otto packed his room. He folded the clean civilian clothes they had been given, left the razor, left the books, left the apple he had saved from dinner. He put on his old uniform jacket. For the first time in weeks. Carl found him in the hallway. "You're not serious." Otto's expression was calm. "I am." "You don't even know where we are." Otto gave a faint smile. "That's the point." The gate opens again. At sunrise, the outer gate stood open. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, just open. The entire camp gathered near the entrance. No guards visible. Otto stepped forward. He didn't give a speech, didn't shake hands. He simply nodded once. To Carl, to the others. Then he crossed the threshold. The desert air swallowed him immediately. The sand stretched endlessly toward the horizon. In the far distance, heat shimmered over asphalt, maybe a road, maybe an illusion. He walked steadily. No hesitation. 20 steps. 50. 100. No alarms. No vehicles. No shots. The camp watched in silence. He grew smaller against the bright Nevada sun. 200 meters. 500. A tiny, dark figure against endless gold. Then the heat waves swallowed him whole, and he disappeared. The waiting, no one moved for several minutes. The gate remained open. Finally, someone whispered, "He won." But the word didn't feel right. Won what? Freedom? Isolation? Death? They returned inside slowly. Breakfast was served as usual. The routine continued, but something had shifted. There was now proof that leaving was possible, and that made staying harder to justify. Day 1. Without Otto lunch came Dinner came. No sign of him, no announcement, no mention. The Americans acted as if nothing had changed. That night, Carl couldn't sleep. He imagined Otto collapsing in the sand, imagined dehydration,